something like Oxford or to say something like Cambridge. These are two institutions that are not just at the top of the UK, but also at the top of the world. So they're up there with, your famous kind of movie style Ivy League universities in the US. And I think that it's a really good route to go down if you are particularly passionate about the kind of thing that you're doing. If you have a real academic love for a subject, then I think it's a really good way to really engage with that. Now, there's something here about the world-class teaching. So I'm not going to go through these sort of as a methodical thing, just because it's good to get a feel, I think, more generally. But the feel is this kind of thing of passion, right? And it's accompanied by this teaching, which is really specific. Now, that might sound a bit strange, but I think when I say specific, what that really refers to is a kind of engagement that I think makes Oxford and Cambridge very different institutions. So you're really learning with top academics every week, twice a week. You're having a 1 hour conversation. You're handing in an academic essay, which is a summary of your opinions on a topic. And it can be a very exhilarating thing. I didn't come from a very traditional university background, at least not with my family. I'm the first in my family to have gone to university. So for me, being able to engage with these subjects in such a way was not something I had necessarily considered before. But I think that it's something that, for those of you who are on the fence about applying or not applying, is something that you should at least apply for. What's the harm? It's only something that is a choice and a chance that you could take. So I think, don't be dissuaded, even if it does seem academically rigorous. I think that can only be a good thing if you have passion for your subject. So here's a kind of summary of the application deadlines, perhaps the less passionate bit. I am acutely aware that I am talking to a screen and you all have all been muted. So I'm not some sort of kind of like robot organizer. I am aware that you guys are listening. So here are some of the dates, right? The reason they'll be at the beginning of October, and that might seem a bit strange if you have some experience with university applications, is because Oxbridge, Oxford and Cambridge require early application in the same way that, medicine or maybe like veterinary sciences might. So they have an earlier application deadline. And it means you have to you have to do your aptitude test before those deadlines. So you'll see here that a lot of the humanities aptitude tests, like the TSA, the CAT, the ELAT, the HAT as well, they all require a specific deadline. Now, the LNAT doesn't necessarily have a specific date at which you have to sit the test. So there are a range of bookings you can make. And this is because with the LNAT, it's not so much organized by the school or the sixth form or the college that you're at. So the LNAT is something you have to book yourselves. Now, I can go into this in a bit more detail when we come to discussing the LNAT. Obviously, I'm not sure how many of you are doing law, but it'll still be useful in that respect, just for the process of aptitude tests. So you'll see here that the deadline for all Oxford and Cambridge admissions tests is 29th of September. As I said, the exception to this is the LNAT, which you can register for at your own discretion, but it's advisable to do this before sort of the end of October the 20th. So, I mean, we have a little waiting for answers section here. Don't know if there's any sort of incoming chats, but essentially Oxford and Cambridge require you to do aptitude tests. Now, this is, so in interviews and tough, difficult are also true. These are all difficult processes to undertake. So depending on college is not necessarily true. What will depend on your college will be the courses offered, but the tests, the exams you do will still be the same. It's nice to see someone has written enjoyable down. Confusing is also perhaps accurate. So I think what we have here is a good summary of the required academic level. These things are confusing. They can be difficult. And yeah, they aren't always knowledge-based. It's normally to do with your thinking skills. So aptitude is about the skills you can bring. And it's really a pre-screening test. So the way it works at Oxford to Cambridge is slightly different in terms of how it fits into the whole pre-screening position. So my friends at Cambridge, for example, said to me, you know, it's more likely for you to get an interview at Cambridge than at Oxford. It's just a different way of doing things. But then again, they have the same admissions ratings. So it's just a slightly different way of doing things. Now, what I would like to do going into the next section, as much as anything, is to try and dispel some of the rumors about, you know, how difficult or perhaps daunting these tests can be. I do remember personally being sat in a driving test center, being faced with this sort of blank page document where I had to sit my test. And it is nerve-wracking, but I think there is a way of thinking about these tests as, you know, as someone said here, enjoyable, right? They are there to give you a stepping stone into, you know, a potential institution that is world leading, that is very academically rigorous. And so I think it's part of that process. And if you look at it in that way, it can be quite exciting. I know that's a big ask, but it can be fairly exciting. So moving on from the answers, you know, we get onto this section about why do we have an entry exam? And I think summarizing some of the reasons I've given is because it's to help the universities really understand the strengths a candidate would bring. Contrary to popular belief about top institutions like Oxford and Cambridge, they are not there to see you fail. They are not there to pick apart a candidate from the outset and prove why they don't deserve to be there. That's not the point of this testing. The point of this testing, and I know I sound like a paid promoter, but I'm not. The point of this testing is really to kind of weight candidates. You know, candidates will perform differently in different areas, right? You might have a very strong personal statement. You might have a really strong set of predicted grades, and you might have a really strong aptitude test. If you get offered an interview as well, your interview might be strong, and all of these things go into whether or not you will receive an offer. So it's really important that you understand an aptitude test as part of this process. You know, on the screen it says it's about choice. It's about helping the universities choose. And that is very true. It's about giving an extra piece of information, as it says, to help your university, your college, and your tutors decide which candidates have the required skills they're looking for. It's not necessarily as binary as saying better or worse. It's not about that. It's about saying which demonstrate the skills that our teaching regime draws upon, you know, and tries to use. So I think it's about part of that process. So here are a list of the entry exams that we will be going through today. I mean, entry exam is a little bit of a misleading term in some respects, because it suggests that you have to pass these. There is no necessary pass mark. It's more of a weighting system, as I said. There is a threshold for a lot of them, but it's mainly about showing the universities that you have the requisite skills. So we will go on to the first of these, which is surprisingly my cup of tea, the LNAT. So the LNAT is a pretty peculiar test. I've been teaching it now for, wow, it seems like a long time, 18 months, which I know in the grand scheme of things, I think my grandparents would probably say that's not that long, but for me, that seems like a long time. Now, this is a very peculiar test, as I said, because it's nothing like you would ever have done at school, in the respect that it's a real critical thinking test. There's no knowledge requirement involved. You don't need to know anything about the law before you do it. Some of it is completely separated from the law. You might have passages on different things, so that are completely non-law related. So it's very much not knowledge based. Now, it is an entry exam for undergraduates at both Cambridge and Oxford. It's a 2-hour and 15-minute exam. It's split into 2 sections. The first one is this critical thinking test based on different passages with a few different questions. You have a second section, which is this essay-based section. Now, this is probably not like an essay that you, as a student, or if you're a parent, you'll ever have seen your children write for their A levels or for their GCSEs. It's very short form, argumentative essay, and these sections are demonstrating different skills. The first section is to demonstrate that you can read and digest information and critically analyze that information. And the second is to show that you can put forward and defend arguments. So it really is not very good for the lawyer stereotype in being extremely pedantic and very specific. So I don't know what that says about the law aptitude test organization, but it does test these core skills you'll use in your university education. I can even recognize now throughout 3 years of my degree the skills that I used, and it's not something I think that you should be worried about at first. In terms of, if you do a paper and you don't do so well, it's not something that people get immediately. It's very much something you would need to work at and put some effort into. So we'll come onto this a little bit more after I've introduced these sections, but it's just to give you a flavor for now. Okay, great. So the ELAT. This is the English literature admissions test. I have to say, a few of my friends look upon this quite fondly, because I think if you enjoy close reading and articulating your kind of responses to literature, then it's quite a fun exercise. So going through the basics. Firstly, it's an essential for English language and literature, for any English combination, really, history and English, etc. And it's a 90-minute exam. So it's as I said, it's about these close reading skills, very similar to what you would do in English A level. So it's important to brush up on those skills. Now, you will be asked to write an essay, so this is important too. You have 2 passages, and they will focus on elements such as language, imagery, syntax, form, and structure. The kind of classic bread and butter of English language and literature A level. The things that are kind of like required in an exam. So it's important to brush up on those skills. And overall, you do have more of a choice. So you will have 6 passages, and you'll be prompted to compare and contrast 2 of them. Now, the theme of choice in essays is quite important for these tests, because they do allow some discretion for the student. I didn't mention, but if we're talking about this kind of specific essay detail, the LNAT also offers you 3 choices, and you have to pick 1 essay choice. So there is some ability for you to kind of use your intuition for what passages or whichever questions you think you will be most successful in. The hat. I always find this one funny, just because hat. So this is the history admissions test. It's required for Oxford. This is a very typical kind of source-based history exercise. So you need to interpret the source. You don't have any knowledge about its context. It's just about using your skills. So very similar to the LNAT, no law related knowledge required for the exam, only certain skills. Now, obviously, you do need to be able to think about historical context here, in the same way that you would need to be able to think of interpretation for the LNAT. But you don't need any prior knowledge for any of these exams. So whoever wrote no prior knowledge on the question board, they did a good job of predicting that. So you have 1 hour and it's just writing about the given primary source. Theme of time is coming up. So as we're moving through these, there's a few things we need to keep in mind. As I said, the first one is choice. You do have some choice. And the second thing is thinking about time and planning. So it's important, if you have any essay task, to think about planning. TSA. So the thinking skills assessment, it's slightly less jazzy in terms of name. It doesn't refer to any specific subject, but this is quite a broad one. So if you're doing a lot of different disciplines at Oxford, for example, this is stuff like experimental psychology, human sciences, philosophy, politics and economics, or PPE, and then psychology, philosophy and linguistics, or PPL. You need to have done this test. So as it says below, if you're applying for economics and management or history and economics, you'll be required to take section 1. So there are different sections to the TSA. The first one is more mathematically reasoning based. So it's important that we remember, this is kind of the third theme, as I said, that there are different sections to these exams and they require different levels of preparation or different focuses. So uniting themes, different levels of focus, different types of paper, remembering that planning is key, and also remembering they can be enjoyable. So there's that. So as we said, section 1 of the TSA is more numerical reasoning based. So it's again using your critical thinking skills. This is an important buzzword, critical thinking. What does this mean? Well, it's about the ability to understand and interpret information and use your skills. It's something that you do in a lot of A-level subjects, a lot of college-based subjects too, and it's very important for Oxbridge, this focus on critical thinking, because a lot of the work you will be doing is very critically focused. The way that the universities teach focuses specifically on having debates or getting to the bottom of an issue. And that can be a very strenuous task for any critical thinking skills. So it's important that they can vet that you have these skills in the first place. So that's the section 1, 50 multiple choice questions, assessing, problem solving, and numerical reasoning. We have section 2. So this is more of the writing task. Now, you will be expected to organize ideas in a clear and concise manner. So this doesn't just go for the TSA. Maybe this can be the fourth finger on our list of things to remember, right? This is the 4th point. We need to remember that clear and concise expression is important. So all of these tests have these similarities in these ways. They just have a slightly different format for the exam. And I think that by pointing that out, I want to demonstrate that it's not that scary, right? They are testing skills that you will have, that you will be able to develop. It's not testing anything crazy or something that's impossible for you to do or for your children to do. So it's not the end of the world. Yeah. Okay, great. So the CAT. Now, the CAT is exclusively for classics. If you do any combination of classics and another subject, you will also need to do this, same as the HAT, right? It's if you're doing history or the ELAT, for example, if you're doing an English-based combination. So this has 3 papers, and this is the only one I think that's a little bit more specific, right? They have a Latin translation test, a Greek translation test, and the classics language aptitude test. So this is possibly the outlier in terms of specificity. It requires you to have some prior knowledge, but I don't think many people would be applying for classics if you haven't studied Latin or Greek at A level. So yeah, I mean, and this, again, as I said, is dependent upon various things. One of these things it's dependent upon is whether or not you're taking Latin or Greek. So you might take the Latin paper rather than the Greek paper. Cool, the GAT. So this is for geography. It's a new thing this year. And it's there to allow candidates to demonstrate their academic potential. Now, it's the same as the rest of them in that respect. So it's a new test. There are some more details on it that we can obviously supply later on, or you can contact Oxbridge Mind or Study Mind or Medic Mind in order to get some more information. But there is general information, and there are general information packs on the internet. So quick Google will help you out there. And then the MLAT. So the MLAT is the Modern Languages exam. And it's designed to really test the basic structures of the foreign language. It's not really a vocabulary test. And so this is what makes the CAT a bit of an outlier, because this is about your ability to reason with a language. So you have a 30-minute language section. It depends on which course you're applying for. And so there will be a correlation between the papers that you take, the sections you take, and the course you're applying for. You know, if you're applying for German, you'll take the German sections, presumably because you're studying German. And so that will be useful. Now we have a link there that you can copy if you have access to this PowerPoint or this Mentimeter, sorry. And this will give you a bit more of a guide. As I said a minute ago, there is information on all of these. All of these aptitude tests have their own website, and they have their own information packs as well. And you can look on the university websites too for both Oxford and Cambridge where required. Yeah, and note there is no longer a linguistics section. So I suppose for those of you who don't massively enjoy linguistics, that's a bit of a bonus. Okay, great. So here's a bit of a list of what courses at Oxford require the MLAT. Now, I'm not sure how many people here are looking or are interested in modern languages applications, but at Oxbridge, there is a significant offering in modern languages. It's not just your kind of core. I saw a couple of likes come in, so perhaps that indicates that we do have a few modern languages in the room. So as I said, with modern languages, there are substantial offerings, right? You can do European and Middle Eastern languages, you can do classics and modern languages, English and modern languages, history and modern languages, other modern languages, and a few other courses. So you'll notice that philosophy has come up a couple of times in a combination. Now, Oxford don't offer straight philosophy. They only offer it as a combination subject alongside something like theology, or alongside other combinations that we've seen, PPE for politics and economics, and philosophy, politics and linguistics, or philosophy, psychology and linguistics. There are different combinations you can choose, and it's up to you to really look into what your college is offering. The college system is something that we might have time to go on to in a bit, but it's one of those things that can be demystified a little bit. So as I said, different courses, a lot of range within those study specific languages. And yeah, the offering is really good. Some colleges, for example, Wadham College, which is where I graduated from, offers specific courses in Persian and Middle Eastern languages, because they have a large Persian teaching contingent at the college and a Persian library. So the resources are there, and this may be an area where it's interesting to think about, well, you know, which colleges offer these things. I can't off the top of my head remember which of all of the undergraduate colleges offer different languages. I would be very impressed with myself if I could. But it's something worth looking up. There are tables online that will tell you. Great. Okay, so I mean, this is a very important slide. I think this is unfortunately one where I might have to do the most talking. But in all seriousness, it's very important to remember these kind of 5 points. So timing is everything. We spoke a little bit about preparation and focusing on planning. Now, timing is everything in 2 respects. The first respect is that timing is everything in terms of actually planning practically your exam. You know, when you're going to sit it, how well are you prepared? It's very important that you go into the exam feeling like you've had enough time to prepare. And although we said, you know, these can be enjoyable exams, if any of you do buy into that, I certainly do. It's important that we remember that these things need to be prepared for, and they are a serious exam. So timing is everything in that first respect. Now, in the second respect, within the exam itself, internal to the exam, you need to be conscious of timing. So you need to be aware that these things are quite pressurized. For example, in the LNAT, you have a 2 hour and 15-minute test. 1 hour and 35 minutes, so 95 minutes of that is on the first section, the comprehension section, and you have 12 passages to do, which have 3 or 4 questions each. So including reading time for those passages at 3 or 4 minutes, we only really have a minute per question. So it's important that you can be very, very thorough and diligent when it comes to planning. Now, the second point to note is, you know, work on foundational knowledge. This is very true for some subjects, especially for the CAT. It's important that we think about, you know, the skills we have in languages, and it's the same for the MLAT as well. You know, this foundational knowledge is a little bit more relevant here. Foundational knowledge is a term that I think is very important that we unpack. So what is foundational knowledge? Well, there are probably a few things that come to mind, but I think what foundational knowledge means here is not just the kind of core things that you can remember about a given subject. That's not foundational knowledge. Foundational knowledge is the kind of building blocks, the knowledge of the procedures you have to do the subject well. In English, this would be something like being able to think about quotations and the implication this has on understanding a text. It's also true, say, in the LSAT, right? The thinking exam, the TSA as well. It's very important that we focus on the core skills that go into critical thinking. So being able to understand the value of an implication, and if an assumption's been made. These kind of things are very foundational in this sense. These are the things we need to work on. So I think that's what foundational means. It's the core things that can help us to do a subject well. It's not just the things that you can remember. So there are specific ways to develop that, and we can come on to this in a little bit. So using the syllabus, well, this is one of those things that I think needs to be said, even though it does seem it goes without saying. You know, if we have a particular syllabus that's been offered to us, especially for the LMAT, there are things that we need to make sure that we know, especially on the Oxbridge Mind course. Some skills have been synthesized, and you know, I've been very present in seeing this happen myself. So I can attest that it's very well done, that there are particular syllabuses for these things. And I think that it's important to remember that these skills are there for a reason. Okay, and don't just use past papers. Well, this is really important. So I can speak to this personally from my experience with the LMAT. You know, back when I studied the LMAT 4 years ago, which makes me feel really ancient. It actually could be longer than that, maybe 5 years ago. Yes, 5 years ago when I studied the LMAT. I remember using past papers, you know, the kind they offer you online, and also the kind that you can buy in a textbook. Now, these things they're not bad resources at all. They are very good resources. I would have little integrity if I sat here after using them said they're bad resources. They are not. But there are certain skills that can only be developed in being reflective about your previous progress, and also skills that you need to learn independently of these things. It's not just useful to try and learn what the correct answers might be to inform how you might do in a test that can be completely different. Because of that variability, it's important to try and learn these foundational skills, these core pieces of knowledge. That's what's important. And expect the unexpected. This is a good bit of advice. How one can expect the unexpected is difficult to say, but I think it really means something like keep an open mind, especially in that practicing stage, right, where you might be preparing for these exams. If you keep an open mind as to how you've gone wrong and be reflective about your own processes, that is foundational knowledge for any subject. It's the process by which you learn. And it's something that is, well, it's pretty much the defining feature of Oxbridge application processes, Oxbridge interviews, and the Oxbridge teaching process, being very hypercritical of your own performance so that you can improve is important, but being able to understand where you've gone wrong in an academic sense is really crucial to engaging with that passion. A lot of the time, I think it's really about this kind of quest for knowledge and quest for the truth. To be able to put forward your ideas is what this kind of education and these kind of subjects give you. Apart from the world-renowned teaching and the world-renowned qualifications that you get at the end, which do give you a significant step. Being able to be reflective on your own progress is probably one of the most important skills in life, because it teaches you, to value your own improvement, but it also teaches you how to understand the achievement of your goals, not just improvement, but what are specific things that I want from my life, from my education, from different points, and it helps you to focus on those. And I think, for these reasons, it's just a really fundamental skill and it's such an important one. It's something that you develop at these institutions, and it's something that they want to test. So being open to being wrong is one of the most important things. I'm sure there's lots of speculation about what have your tutors said to you at some point that's made you really rethink something. And I can think of lots of funny stories of my friends being told, you absolutely might be wrong about this, and then having to kind of trot back to the drawing board to rethink it. But it's a really important thing to be able to do for these institutions. Okay, great. So, well, this is an important part of the presentation. I think in a lot of respects, it'll be why many of you are here. So I can attest to this very personally in terms of the LMAT. The package that is offered by Oxbridge Mind is a really specifically responsive and tailored package. I think the words personalized and tailored there are actually full of quite a lot of meaning. I mean, I've been tutoring this exam and other critical thinking tests now for, as I said, over a year and a half. And I think that it's a really good way to learn from people who themselves have been through this process and understand some of the intricate elements of these tests and also the demands. I think the benefit is that you have teachers, right? You have people to soundboard off who themselves have been through the same growth processes that you've been through. And I think in a way it's a nice process for actually mentoring. I think the best sessions are reciprocal. And I think that a reciprocal session where you can learn, about a student and really offer them, I think, the opportunities to succeed, and they can offer you, some learning back, I think is really what a good tuition is all about. And I think that from my experience with working with a raft of other tutors, some of who are actually my peers at at university and also with other really well qualified tutors has been a really important thing for understanding, what Medic Mind and Oxbridge Mind can offer you. I think as more of an institution for growth. These skills are not just things that you lose after you do these tests. I mean, my LNAT preparation was something that, at the time there wasn't a lot of resources for, and so those skills have stayed with me. So I think that that's super important to remember. We have some TSA reviews here. Reviews are a very, really valuable way, of course, of assessing a service or a set of proposals. But I think the best testimony is from, I suppose, when you see a student become engaged in a subject. I think when someone cares, I think that's a really good indicator of how well they'll succeed in this process, but also for how well they've grown as a student. And I think that as much as these reviews can be incredible, and a lot of them are, if not great, the biggest testimony I can have is that the students really seem to grow into interest. They seem to develop, and I think that that's the most important testimony alongside these. So we'll have some time for questions, but if you want to find out more, there are resources here for interview, for personal statement and admissions. Now, it's very convenient, this little trifecta has come up at the end of interview, personal statement and admissions. I mean, when I started to take this journey, it was really alien to me. I felt really out of my depth. I had a lot of friends who had been applying to Oxbridge. They had brothers, sisters, parents who had been to these institutions. And for me, this wasn't the case. And it was a little bit daunting. But I think these kind of three elements are the overview of it for those of you who might, not necessarily understand what the process requires. So we've talked a lot about aptitude tests today, and there'll be a session on personal statement tomorrow. But for all intents and purposes, it starts with your personal statement and your admissions test. These things are handed in on your UCAS form with your grades. And I won't go into too much detail on personal statement so as to not rob myself of information for tomorrow. But essentially, these are the things you need to remember when they're being handed in. And then if you are given an offer of interview based on your application, that's the final stage of the process. And then you're given your offer. And if you receive your offer, then you have to meet your requirements of your offer. So this will be the predicted grades they give you. Okay, great. So there are free resources there. The college comparison resource is actually pretty cool. There are loads of ways of comparing colleges. Now, it's quite easy for me to just freewheel about this, but I have lots of experience with choosing colleges. For me, it was a very confusing task, as you might have guessed. Now, I had some friends who chose their colleges based on where they thought the food would be the best. And I don't just mean like where there was the best offering for in-house college meals, but so much as where they actually did the best dishes. So the menu was very important. But for college comparisons, I think it's an important thing to do. The most important thing is to select somewhere where I think you feel comfortable and you like the look of. There might be different things that you value, and that's why this resource is really great. It kind of cuts through some of the confusion. But in order to use this resource, I think you need to go into it with an open mind and just say, well, all the colleges are really great, right? They're all top academic institutions. Sometimes people go on about this hierarchy, and I think they think that this makes the choices easier for colleges, but it's not the case. It's really not the case. Look at the comparison. It's really just about finding out where you want to go. I mean, there's no hierarchy between colleges. Academically, really at all. There is no hierarchy. It's just about, does it do the course that you do, and does it look like somewhere you'd like to go? Visit open days, that's important. And then we have the Oxbridge guide as well. So this is a more general approach to universities in terms of Oxbridge application and what Oxbridge offers. It's important to read, but I hope that you've been able to get some sort of semblance of the concept today, as confusing as it is, to be honest. And then on the YouTube channel, there are a host of free resources. I think, it's worth checking that out. So here's some more information. This is good for giving you an outline of the page, and also for saying, well, it's both an admissions service alongside an A-level support service. So I think those two things go in tandem, as I said, in terms of the way that these things are assessed. So that's important to note. Incoming questions will show up here, apparently. I've got a couple of questions in the chat that I will go to first. So, I will answer them in chronological time order. So my first question was, do you know how exam access arrangements work with the LNAT, and whether Cambridge would look down on them with the school? So I'm not particularly sure what exam access arrangements work, but is that if that's exam access for students who need to have an accessible exam, I don't think that Cambridge would look down on that at all. And if there is a lower score, I think that will be factored into the Cambridge process. I mean, the one thing to note is that these Oxbridge applications are looked into in a lot of detail. I mean, I've spoken to my tutors since leaving, and they said, we really did read all of your applications 30 times. We got to know you before we even met you at the interview. So I think it's I don't think that there would necessarily be a look down if certain exam access requirements were needed. But I will say this, that there are rough threshold scores for these universities that you need to meet. It changes every year. My personal opinion is that it matches grade inflation, but yeah, so it's important to make sure you understand what the threshold is and where you need to be for that. So my next question is, what happened in your law interview? What case studies were you given, and what did they ask you? The law interview is a very strange memory I have. So I mean, I can remember it as if it was something I did 20 minutes ago. It's burned into my mind, but for good reason. It was very weird. You meet these academics. It's very strange to meet people like this, but it's a really fun thing. So in my law interview, this does slightly depend on college, what tasks they ask you to do, but normally you have two interviews. One of the interviews will be some sort of exercise that focuses on interpreting a piece of information, and the other one will be something a little bit more active, like you playing a game or making something up. Now these seem not very sinister right now, and that's because they're not particularly sinister, but it is important to note that these are pure critical thinking demonstrative tests, right? You need to demonstrate certain skills. To prep for it, I think there are three things that you need to do, right? You need to have a mock interview. That is completely necessary with some know-how. Now, it's a service that we've offered. I've conducted hundreds of interviews now, which is always quite fun for me, not being on the other end. So you need to have a mock interview. The second thing you need to do is you need to brush up on your critical thinking skills. You don't necessarily need to know any law for these. Actually, in fact, you don't need to know any law that they don't tell you. So you might have to prepare a piece, or you might be given a case study or something like that. It's completely random. I see that it's been asked, what case studies was I given? Well, I was given a piece of case law to read, and I had to tell them some things about it. So being able to read and digest information is also the third thing that's important. So if we remember, to have a mock interview, or preferably a few, to brush up on critical thinking skills and practice the kind of things that come up, that's important. Okay, so I have a question on the screen that I'll answer next. Just go to these, got quite a few. So how can you improve your critical thinking skills? This is a really good question. I think there are lots of ways to go about it. I think reading up online about what kind of core critical thinking skills are is a really good first step. You might maybe buy a book or something, but critical thinking skills are really, really crucial to understand before you get into applying them. So being able to access what a critical thinking skill is something you can look up online. It's just the way that you handle information. Can you think about it in a certain way? Can you critique the information? Can you think about, what are the problems with a particular piece of information? And I think a really good way to practice that, and this is something that I personally recommend for the LNAT, is to read newspaper articles, read articles online, and think about what the issue is. Why might there be a problem with what's being said? This kind of thing. Very important to do. So in summary, first thing, read up online or do some research, and it will tell you roughly what it is. But it's mainly, can you be critical of a piece of information? Can you pick out the problems, think about the solutions, think about what's right, think about maybe what's wrong, pick apart the text, and then practice that skill. So I think that's important. I hope that answers your question. So those two things, reading up, applying. What made you choose law at Oxford over Cambridge? So, I mean, I have many friends at Cambridge who will say to me that Cambridge law is better. And I have many friends at Oxford who will say to people at Cambridge that Oxford law is better. Now, what does this tell us? Well, it just kind of tells us that there's not much difference at all. Now, there are some slight differences in the way that the course is examined. For example, Cambridge has exams at the end of every year that you have to study for, and Oxford does a set of exams in your first year called moderations, and then you do the rest of your exams at the end of your degree with a piece of coursework in the middle. It's an extended essay type thing. So there's no real difference. And I think that I purely chose just because I like the look of Oxford more. There were a few things, but the quality of education is really similar. I hate to have to say it, but the quality of education is exactly the same. You're both dealing with world-class academics. Most of my tutors, split down the middle, either went to Oxford or Cambridge. My friends at Cambridge, their tutors split down the middle, either went to Oxford or Cambridge. So a lot of the time, you're mixing with people who studied at either institution. So the thing that I think was the personal choice for me was that I went to the open day, and it really made me think, well, actually, I like this place more. I like the look of the colleges. It's something as trivial as that. So if I were you, I think read up on what both of the universities are like. And I think that will help you to kind of decide. Academically, there is no difference. I mean, maybe look at some of the course requirements or some of the offerings of the material the courses do, but they all study relatively similar things. They might just have slightly different options one year. So have a read up, but don't worry if you're not finding which one. Both of them are great. I think it's better to get a personal feel for the place. Okay. How do you recommend preparing for the LMAT besides using past papers? So, I mean, there are a few ways, and these are key services that I've engaged with. So I think that preparing for the LNAT without using past papers is also about trying to do other critical thinking tests. That's one way, and then practicing essays, practicing your reading skills, these kind of things. It's not just about doing the questions; it's about understanding how to approach the passage in the first place. And these are all very, foundational things that I cover in for example, in tuition, not to not to just advertise myself as the best thing ever, but no, I think that there are certain methods to go about it, and making sure you read other content is really important, and making you read newspaper articles, for example, and criticize those. That's a thing that you can do. You can look at preparing essays for yourself, thinking about all issues. Debate handbooks are always good too. So is tutoring necessary for the habit? This is a tricky question, because I think it's really dependent on the student more than anything. Some of the best historians I know, they had tutoring, and equally other great historians, also didn't have tutoring. So I think it really depends on two things. And this is the thing I think is important for every exam. It's the confidence you have going into the exam and your skills and abilities. If you feel comfortable in both respects, then that's great. But I think because tutoring is so big, it does really depend on the individual. If you feel like you might require a minor amount or just some points in the right direction, it can be really useful to learn from these people. So I think it's useful insofar as, you might need it, or you might want it, or you might need some direction. But it's really dependent on the individual student themselves. So is any of the aptitude tests in person? Will it all be on paper typing? No, none of the aptitude tests are in person at the universities. They're all on paper or typing. You do them before you even get an offer of interview. So yeah, it's submitted and then marked and whatever. Okay, great. Do you need references when applying? So your school will give you your UCAS reference, and that's really what you go off for a reference. But the answer is no. Not in like a formal sense. You get given an academic reference by your school or your college or whatever, and that's what is helpful. Okay, cool. How can I apply to do the? So I think look online at what the specific process is. It might be that your school will book it anyway. I don't see any indication that it's one of those book yourself ones like the LMAT. So I think get in contact with your school, talk to the examination department. They will set these things up if need be. And I think it's important, to get them into the loop as well, just for general support as well. So what was the hardest part about the first 3 months of being an undergrad? Tough question. I think it's not the hardest part. There's not one hardest part. I think there are general different difficult parts that span a range of different things. Like being away from home for the first time is always really tough. You don't get to come home and have a meal with your family, or if that's something you guys do, or you don't get to see your friends as often. But I think there's nothing really necessarily impossible about being an undergrad. So I mean, yeah, the social side and the home side is one thing, and then the academic side is true too. It is really tough at Oxbridge being an undergrad at first. Now, the only piece of advice you ever have to hear is you will work it out. And I thought, when people used to tell me, what a load of rubbish, what does that mean, to work it out? You have a college parent system at Oxbridge. You have someone in the year above or a couple of people in the year above who look after you for a bit. And they end up becoming a really good friend of yours. So it's an important system, but they will tell you, you'll figure it out in terms of balance. And your tutors are really understanding of this. They don't expect you to be kind of academically perfect or to be academically organized immediately. It's really hard. So the hardest part is pretty much everything when you go. It's being away from home. It's the work is harder than things you'll ever have done before. Organizing your own personal time is hard. Keeping up with social events is hard. But you do figure it out. You find a natural balance, and so you should be comforted by that, I think. I've been trying to research more into the GAT, but I'm having a lot of trouble finding anything. Could you explain what it involves in further detail? So I'm not really a GAT specialist, unfortunately. I think it sounds quite fun, but I'm not a GAT specialist. Now, there are resources online to help you, but I think if you want to phone up Oxbridge Mind, they will have all the relevant information. I know it sounds like a bit of a cop-out answer, but it is true that these are some really knowledgeable education consultants, and they do have a lot of wisdom on these topics. So I think if you want to organize a phone call or something, there are details provided in the slide and will be provided to you as well that you can access to help you kind of figure these things out. So I am sorry, I can't give you a specific detail, but I think you can always phone the GAP people, I suppose, or ask your school or something as well. But Oxbridge Mind will be pretty rapid in responding. How did you choose which college you applied to? Great question. I actually didn't. So in a kind of Harry Potter-esque way, I kind of got sorting hatted. So I applied to one college and they said, well, we really liked your application. We don't have space for you. So I got sent to another college and that's it. Now there's a process called pooling, which happens when you interview. And sometimes it's like the colleges are all competing, right? They try and poach you off the other colleges, and they might offer you an interview and say, "I'll come and interview at our college. We really like the look of your application." And it's really just the colleges trying to find out the right fit for you. So I think that's really important, trying to find that right fit. I chose my college because I went to an open day and I looked around and I looked at a few different colleges and I picked the one that I wanted to apply to. I got moved to another college that I hadn't even heard of, but now it's like an inseparable part of my life, and you grow to love whichever one. So I think going and looking around in person is important, or if you can't do that, trying to read as much. You can always contact students there. I'm sure they would be really happy to help, or you can call up the college. My application is this year, so I have time to get tuition from Oxbridge. Absolutely. I mean, the LNAT is a very short, intense process. You don't need to be training for years. I think it's a discretion thing. Some students might only need a bit of time, a couple of weeks or a few sessions. Some might need a few more. That's just how it is. And unfortunately, you can't predict these things. If you're interested in getting a consultancy confirmation, you can always call up and there will be a service, or there is a service that can point you in the right direction. You can have a trial session, see if this is something that you need. But no, you have plenty of time to do these things. Okay, I like to study history and English at Oxford, but I'm doing English language A level and not literature. Do you think I'd still be able to study this despite meeting that requirement? So I'm not sure if you have to study English language, but you stated it's a requirement. I mean, I think it's always fine to call up admissions at Oxford and ask them. Don't feel afraid. They're not scary people. They're actually really lovely, and they're a lot more chilled out and probably organized than the rest of the actual academic side of the university. So if it's a requirement, I would suggest that means that you have to have taken it, but you can always check. Can you do the aptitude test at home, or would you need to find a center? The non-LNAT ones you would need to do at school, and the LNAT you need to do at a center. You can't do them at home. Is there a speaking component to the MLAT? No, there is not a speaking component to the MLAT. What's the hardest part of the application process? Well, this is a bit of a tricky one to say, but I think the hardest part is not necessarily one of the actual components. It's more so being self-reflective and being open to changes and how you can reason. I think being able to kind of be understanding of yourself and be self-critical about the way that you approach tests or something is quite important. Doesn't mean not being fair to yourself, but it means like understanding, okay, I make this assumption, or I find this difficult, this kind of thing. So I would say that's the hardest part. But if you want a specific test to make it more fun, I would probably say the aptitude test is pretty tough, or maybe the interview. They're tough in different ways. They're hard in different ways, but they're both fun, I'd say. Is there any history test for Cambridge? I don't believe so. I actually don't have much knowledge because I don't know any Cambridge historians, but I think contact Oxbridge Mind and they'll give you a response. Is there a cutoff for the LNAP? There is a cutoff for the LNAP. You know, you want to do the LNAP by a certain date. It changes every year, so check this year what that date will be, but it will be around October, late October, October the 20th, because at that point your UCAS application will be sent off. So you need to make sure that everything gets sent off at the same time. Now, you don't get your LNAP result until February, but or January, I think. It changes sometimes. But what is important is that you've applied and then they receive your LNAP score after that. So you know, there is a little bit of a window of discretion, but check what the cutoff point for this year is. Would it be better to apply for a specific college or do an open application? It doesn't really matter. This is something that people get hung up on. It doesn't matter at all. You know, an open app. I know friends who did open applications and they were placed somewhere. You're going to love everywhere. Now, in terms of, is it academically a better thing to do, or in terms of application chances, is it a better thing to do? The answer is no. You know, everywhere will receive your application, but I think if you apply to a specific college, it might be nicer for you to know where you've applied, and also to know exactly what that college is about. And in that way, I think it gives you a little bit of room to, you know, to maybe have other options too. But an open application is exactly the same. It doesn't prejudice you in any way. If anything, they're all open applications at the end of the day. Like you just don't know at that point. So, but I think it's more comforting to apply to a specific college personally. I got one more question in the chat. So for the HAP test, will your source always be written, or can you get other types of sources as well? I'm presuming it's written. I don't actually specifically know that. Unfortunately, if you waited for that, I'm sorry, but I don't. Yeah, I'm not too sure. I think, you know, look online or otherwise. I think it is written. But because there's a choice, it might not be. I can't be certain, so I'd have a look. So yeah, that concludes the end of the presentation. Some of you might be thinking, thank God for that. Others of you, I hope that it's been a useful thing to do, and I really, really wish you well with your applications. You know, it is such an enriching thing to do, and I think, you know, if you have the opportunity, why not go for it? Why not? So yeah, that concludes our presentation. Oh, we've got another question in the chat. Thank you. Well, yeah, thank you for attending. I hope that could have been helpful in some way to yeah,